What's up, guys? In our last video, we talked about everything coming with the Warzone Season 3 update and the return of Verdansk. It was a lot. The patch notes were really long, and we covered just about everything in that video. So if you want to watch it, I'll put the video down in the description. This is going to be about nerfs and buffs. We didn't talk about the nerfs and buffs then because I wanted to leave this in its own video. And I'll also show you guys what I think will be the meta weapons after we talk about the nerfs and buffs. It feels like they're doing something really interesting with the weapon balancing, going from Urzikstan to Verdansk. It really feels like they're tweaking how gunfights are going to work. On Urzikstan, you obviously have a lot of close range, long range fights, if that makes sense. So you're using your assault rifles, but in the 30 to 40 meter range. I feel like on Verdansk, there's going to be a lot more 50, 60, 70 meter fights because you've got single big buildings and then a lot of open space around them. Whereas on Urzikstan, you have 3, 4, 5, 6 buildings all within 40, 50 meters of each other. And you're fighting from rooftop to rooftop or from rooftop right below. And it's just going to be interesting how that dynamic plays out. It seems like they're speeding up the TTKs up close and then letting those long range fights kind of be much more difficult, which maybe they see those open spaces and they want people to rotate and be strategic coming through those spaces and not have to worry about just getting absolutely ripped off of headies. But once I show you guys in the patch notes of the nerfs and buffs, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. So for instance, the AK-74 is getting a damage buff, but its range is getting nerfed. And that tells me they're going to want you to be able to kill people pretty quickly up close, but the longer the range, it's going to be a much harder fight, allowing for people to rotate in those open distances. The Ames is getting a damage buff and a range nerf. The AS Val is getting a damage buff and a range nerf. The Cypher 91 is getting a damage buff and a range nerf. The GPR 91 is getting a damage buff and a range nerf. The Krieg C is getting a damage buff and a ranged nerf. You're starting to see a pattern. The Model L is getting a pretty good buff to its damage in its closest range, but then it's getting nerfs to its ranges. The XM4 is also getting a damage buff and a range nerf. And then the Goblin MK2 is not getting touched at all other than some ADS speed. Honestly, the only thing this thing really needs is a recoil buff. It would be really good if you could actually hit consecutive shots, but it bounces all over the place. Without a recoil buff, this thing just won't ever be very viable. And then with the SMGs, you'll kind of see the same pattern. C9's getting damage buff, range nerf. Jackal's getting a damage buff, range buff until the last range, and then it's getting a range nerf. And then again, you're going to see like multipliers are getting increased, and then different attachments are getting tweaked. They're just really trying to balance this thing out for a new gameplay loop on a different map that's built completely differently with different ranges that you're fighting in. So we'll see how it all plays out. The Compact is getting a damage buff and then a slight range buff and then some range nerfs. It's kind of getting a little bit of a balance all over the place. The KSV is getting a damage buff and a range nerf. The PP19 is getting damage buffs and range nerfs. The PPSH is getting damage buffs and range nerfs. And then the SOG might be the winner in all of this. It is getting damage buffs and range buffs. This thing has always felt like the MAC-10. It's one of my favorite SMGs right now, but it's kind of not fully been in the meta. I think this will fully put it in the meta. It's got really clean iron sights. It's really accurate, and it's just really mobile and fun to use. And it's getting a damage buff and a range buff, so this has to be in the meta going into next season. And then the Tonto's getting a damage buff as well, range nerfs. This is interesting. I never really realized this, but it does 60 damage per bullet in its closest range. Problem is you don't hit a lot of those shots because it bounces around. But if you can lock in that aim assist, this could be a perfect controller weapon. You only got to hit 5 shots to down somebody. Taking a look at the LMGs, the Fang is getting a damage and range buff. The GPMG is getting a damage buff, a little bit of a range buff and a range nerf. The PU21 is getting a damage buff, range buff, damage buff, range nerf, damage buff, range nerf. And then the XMG is getting a damage buff in its closest range, a damage nerf in its farthest range, and then a range nerf in its closest range and a range buff in its farthest range. That's really weird, but again, they're kind of just balancing it out. And then taking a look at the marksman rifles, the AEK is getting a damage buff, the DM10 is getting a damage buff and a range buff, the SWAT 556 is getting a damage buff and a range buff, and this is going to come with that conversion kit that's going to turn into the Growl, so we'll see how that plays out. Doing 50 damage on an AR should be pretty good. The TR2 is getting a damage buff and a range nerf. And then the Sarkov is getting a damage buff at its closest range, a damage nerf in its farthest range, and then range buffs. And this is going to be perfect for Verdansk. I know we're getting the HDR, which is going to have infinite one-shot, but the Kar 98 being meta is so important for the game. The lower torso and upper arm multipliers are getting increased and leg multipliers increase. This means hitting follow-up second shots to get 2 shot downs at all distances is going to be so much easier. Obviously, if you hit headshots at certain ranges, then you're going to get the 1 shot down. But hitting a 2-shot combo with the Kar 98 is going to be so much easier, and it's going to make sniping so much more fun. You'll have options. You won't have to run the HDR all the time. You can if you want to. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun to go for those really long shots. But having the Kar 98 as well as an option, it's just going to be perfect. Pistols, the 9mm is getting a damage nerf with a range buff. The Grakova is getting a damage buff and a range buff. The GS45 is getting a damage nerf and a range buff. The Strider 22 is getting a damage nerf and a range buff. And then the Siren pistol, the 9mm, is getting a damage buff and a range buff, except for its furthest range is a bit of a nerf. So it really just feels like they're trying to rebalance how we're going to do things. I know I've already said this, but I just want to drive this home. It feels like they want the close range fights to be faster TTK, the long range fights to be a little bit harder to fight, allowing teams to rotate more fluidly throughout the map. And then for meta weapons, if I had to pick like 2 or 3 ARs, I would say maybe the AK. I'll show you the build on screen right now, but it's getting a 9-point buff, and I just don't see how that's not going to be beneficial to this. It's already really strong. It's just going to get better. The aims as well, it's getting a 6-point buff, and it does not miss shots. So those 6 extra points is going to be insanely good when you're hitting all of your shots at any range. And then I know I said I'd only give you 2 or 3, but I'm going to give you the Cypher 91 as well. That thing it's getting another 6-point buff. The range is significantly getting brought in from 71 meters to 49 meters, or sorry, 48 meters. But it's still going to be extremely powerful and accurate. And then the GPR 91, this is getting another 6-point buff. I just think in general, this thing doesn't miss a whole lot of bullets, and it's going to be powerful now. It's getting a headshot multiplier increase, lower torso multiplier decrease, but reduced visual recoil. I think this gun is going to be a ton of fun to use. I'll show you guys the build right now. And for SMGs, it's really hard to argue the Jackal. It's getting a 7-point damage buff and a range increase. 10 points in its medium range is getting buffed, and then another 6 points in its maximum. It was already good early in the Black Ops integration. It got nerfed a bit. I think this thing's just going to get brought much more into the meta. I mean, for all I know, we might have a wide open meta with a lot of different SMGs. I'm going to show you the build for the Jackal right now. I'd love for you guys to try this and let me know in the comments what you think. And then the Compact is another one. It's getting a damage and range buff in its close range, and then damage buffs all the way out with some range nerfs, but only by a little bit. It's only losing about a meter on its range. Here's my build for the Compact. I know some people run the integrated suppressor. I personally don't like that. Here's my build. I swear, just try it and come back and let me know how you like it. And then I'm going to give you guys my SOG build. I love the SOG. I loved it before the update. This thing is going to be so much fun after the update. It's really mobile. It's, again, it just reminds me so much of the MAC-10 mixed with the WSP Swarm. Here's my build for it. Make sure you guys try this. And when you inevitably break your PR, make sure to come back and let me know.